where to designate a temple, where to build a permanent dwelling place for me. So David was going to build a temple, but God said, because of all the blood that you shed, you're not the one to build my temple. So David hands that over to his son Solomon. Solomon does build the first temple in Jerusalem. But what's fascinating is there's this prototype temple that dates to the time of Solomon. And it's in this town south of the Dead Sea. It's a little bit southwest of the Dead Sea in this town called Tel Arad. We have no idea why it was there, why it was put up. I have some theories, and I'll talk about those theories, but we're going to look at Arad in Scripture. I don't have these scriptures typed up and put on slides, but I'm just going to read. And if you have your Bibles, you can follow along. Judges chapter 1, verse 16. So this is clear back to the time of the judges. And the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negeb near Arad. And they went and settled with the people. Okay, so Arad is mentioned here in Judges chapter 1, verse 16. But what's interesting about Arad is it dates back over 4,000 years ago. I can't remember if it's 4,000 years ago or 4,000 BC. I think it's actually 4,000 BC, which would make it about 6,000 years old. This is an ancient city that is a very significant city. This was a Canaanite stronghold. So when the Israelites came into the land of Canaan, this was a major city. What's interesting about this city, too, is that it had been abandoned for about, I think it was 1,000 years. Nobody knows why. It just, the history just pauses, and then it picks back up about 1,000 years later. I think that's really incredibly fascinating. Something happened in this city, and we don't know what. And that's really cool. So we have this mysterious temple that's a prototype of the temple that Solomon built in Jerusalem. So now I'm going to get into some of my conspiracy theories. Not really conspiracy theories, but I have a couple theories about Solomon. He was an interesting dude. So Solomon, as you know, he shook hands with a lot of people, political people from nations all around him. And actually, I think at first glance was a pretty smart thing to do because he made peace and made allies with all these people. So as Israel was coming into this land, they were kind of these people that came out of nowhere and drove the Canaanites out. And I think a lot of other people around them were either scared or jealous or just wanted to take them out. So Solomon, as soon as he becomes king, he starts shaking hands with all these kings from all over the world. And they all like the guy. They're coming, they're visiting him, they enjoy his wisdom. I think as far as a political leader and being somebody who unified nations and drew allies, he was a genius at this. Solomon was really good at what he did. And so the people of Israel enjoyed this really peaceful time under the reign of Solomon. And one of the things that God warned against, actually two of the things that God warned against, one, God said, don't build any other altars in my land. He said it repeatedly throughout the Old Testament. Throughout the law of Moses, over and over and over and over again, God says, do not build altars on any of these high places. Even if they were altars to God, I think there was this big warning because that could turn into this pagan worship, which is exactly what happened with the Israelites. Almost immediately, they start building these high places, and they turn into this pagan worship. So Solomon, as you know, married many, many women from many, many different foreign countries, which is the other thing that God warned against. Don't intermingle with these people. Don't marry people from outside of the tribes of Israel. It's not that God was being a segregist and God wasn't racist. God wasn't against foreign people. Certainly the law of Moses also repeatedly says to take care of your neighbor, even the people who are not Israelites. Farmers were to leave the crops on the outer edges of their field so that foreigners, people passing through the country, would have food to eat. Poor people would have food to eat. I mean, the Bible is very clear that other nations are your neighbors, and you treat them kindly. You treat them with compassion. The issue is that these foreign nations were wildly pagan. They worshipped hundreds of gods. Some of these people worshipped dozens or even into the hundreds of gods, and God didn't want this kind of religious pluralism. In the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, God is pretty clear. He's the only God. Don't put any other gods before me. And so God gave this very strong warning for the Israelites not to marry foreign people because he didn't want them to be led astray into all these pagan gods. It's exactly what happened with Solomon. Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. I can't begin to imagine having 1,000 women. Or men, for that matter. It's crazy. I can't wrap my mind around it. So I think it's very possible that early on in Solomon's reign, when Solomon was still wise and not making really stupid decisions, it's quite possible that he was getting his toe a little bit wet and dipping it into the water and testing the waters. And he built this prototype temple in Arad because it's almost identical. It's almost identical to the temple that's in Jerusalem that Solomon built. So the question is, did Solomon build this as kind of a practice temple for the one that he was going to build in Jerusalem? We don't know. Nobody knows. We're going to look at a couple other scriptures. Exodus chapter 27. My fingers don't work well because it's freezing cold. It's been snowing. It's my weather. So my hands are really dry. Exodus chapter 27 and verse 1. These are regulations for building the altar. This was the altar that was in the tabernacle. You shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. And you shall make horns for it on its 4 corners, and the horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make pots for it to receive ashes, and shovels, and basins, and forks, and fire pans. You shall make its utensils of bronze. I'm going to stop there. So it's this altar has to be all one piece. It can't be several pieces of rock that are cut and placed together. It has to be all one rock. And that was way back whenever they were worshiping with the tabernacle. Whenever Solomon is given the regulations for the temple in Jerusalem, same thing. The altar had to be made of one piece of stone. Guess what we found at Arad? It's exactly what we find. So this is fascinating. And this is the very kind of thing that God said, do not build until I tell you where to build my temple. And somebody built this during the time of Solomon's reign. We know that for sure. Somebody built this temple in the city of Arad. The question is who, and the other question is why. Exodus chapter 20, starting verse 22. Exodus 20, starting verse 22. This is chapter 20 is the giving of the 10 Commandments. And then right after the giving of the 10 Commandments, there are laws about altars. And the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for you wield your tool on it. If you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness not be exposed on it. So what's interesting is that this kind of an altar was built in Arad during the reign of Solomon. It's this one-piece stone altar, and though there are steps that go up to it, there are these it's like somebody was testing the waters just to see how far they could play with that line. So there are 3 steps going up to it, but they're not really steps. They're like little mini humps. And it's almost like somebody was like, all right, I'm going to see how far I can push this. They're not technically steps. And it's just interesting. It's really fascinating. Deuteronomy chapter 12. Deuteronomy chapter 12. And starting in verse 1. This is God saying that there's only going to be one place to worship. I'm going to tell you where to build my place of worship, my house of worship. Chapter 12, verse 1, Deuteronomy. These are the statutes and the rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess, all the days that you live on earth. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess served their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their Asherim with fire. You shall chop down their carved images of the gods and destroy their name out of that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. You shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of all your flock. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. Okay, so God is pretty clear, right? This is before the Israelites went in, and God says, okay, when you go into that land, do not build these places of worship all over the place. There's one place where you're going to build my house of worship. You're going to put it there. I'm going to tell you where that's going to be. What's fascinating is that there's a prototype temple that was built in Arad in absolute defiance of these scriptures. So is that something that Solomon did? It's interesting because it dates to the time period of Solomon. And some of the inscriptions, we're going to watch a short video in a little bit, but some of those descriptions that were found in Arad shows that this was not a pagan temple. They were worshiping YAHWEH, the God of Israel. It's very clear from the inscriptions there. And finally, 2 Kings chapter 18. This is certainly way after King Solomon. And this is during the reign of King Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was a good king, reigning in the south, and he tears down all these altars, according to 2 Kings. He tears down all the high places, all these places of worship, but he missed one. We know that he missed it because it's not destroyed. It's partially destroyed, but it's not annihilated like all the other sites are. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 18. I'm getting there slowly. 2 Kings 18, verses 1 through 5. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name is Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David his father had done. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah. And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so Hezekiah comes in. He destroys all these high places, but he missed one. I think that's fascinating. I think that's really interesting. Hezekiah didn't destroy this temple, and the question is why? Did he not know about it? It was kind of in an obscure location, but the city of Arad was well known by the Israelites. This is an ancient city. It was a stronghold of the Canaanites. King Hezekiah certainly knew about this city. The question is, why did he leave the temple? We don't know. Go ahead and show the map. We're going to look at Google Earth for just a second, just to show you where this is on the map. Yeah, it's up there. Okay. So I'm going to move my cursor around. If you look at the Dead Sea, about 3/4 of the way down the Dead Sea, just to the left of it, you see En-Gedi. That's where we talked about last week, where David hid in the caves, hiding from King Saul. Whenever Saul sent 3,000 men, headhunters, to get and to kill David, David hid in the caves in En-Gedi. That's where we talked about last week. If you look kind of catty-corner to the north and the west, you'll see the city of Jerusalem. And straight down from Jerusalem, there's a pin dropped here. That's Tel Arad. So it's actually kind of close to En-Gedi. I didn't drop stakes down to actually see how far the distance is, but I'd say it's probably 40 miles or so from En-Gedi. So we're going to zoom in just for a second. Somebody else has a mic on. I can hear it. En-Gedi, or Tel Arad, is, as you see here, the little thing that popped up, it's a tell or a mound located west of the Dead Sea, about 10 kilometers west of the modern Israelite city of Arad. And if you zoom out a little bit, you can see the imprint, and you look at some of this stuff. We're going to show a video, so I don't need to show a whole bunch of pictures, but so much of this city is intact. Look at this. The roads, houses, buildings, the temple, all of this stuff is intact. Look at that. Look what shape that's in. This is incredible. Not really sure what this is. This might be the temple itself. Some of these pictures aren't marked. But look at the shape this is in. This blows my mind. This was actually, this big building here is the fortress. So the Israelites built this fortress, and it had a wall all the way around the city, which is a key signature of Solomon. Solomon certainly fortified all these cities, and this was a stronghold for the Canaanites. It's now a stronghold for the Israelites. It's on the pretty much the southernmost border of Israel, and it's a really important stronghold. So Solomon builds this fortress. Somebody, we don't know if it was Solomon or not, but somebody during the time period of Solomon built a temple that's an exact replica of the one that Solomon built in Jerusalem, just scaled down a little bit smaller. Isn't this fascinating? This is just so cool. I love this. The fact that this place has been untouched for thousands of years is so cool. And again, if the rocks could cry out and tell a story, these rocks have witnessed a lot of things. I think that's a well with a circle around it here. One day I will visit this city. It was very cool. I'm just going to kind of go through these pictures to give you an idea, then we'll watch the video. There's about a 5-minute video that's really cool. I mean, look how intact this place is. Here's some of the houses that were built. See how close they built these houses together? Kind of how the cities are built today, with you have your apartment buildings are stacked on top of each other. They've been doing that for thousands of years, just to save space. People would live right next to each other, right on top of each other. Okay, you can cue up the video and.
Arad is located slightly east of Beersheba. Stone Age, followed by early Canaanite settlements, were discovered there dating back to 2650 BC, after which time it was apparently abandoned until the 11th century BC. Hello, good morning. We're with him. It was during this era in Israel's history, the time when the temple was built in Jerusalem, that another temple was apparently constructed here at Arad. This temple, very similar, though much smaller than the temple in Jerusalem, is shrouded in mystery and remains the only Judean temple discovered by archaeologists to date. But who exactly built it, and why? And add yet another layer of mystery, why would an Israelite temple be built here when there is express warning in Deuteronomy 12 to not offer sacrifices apart from the place of God's choosing, which during this era would have been Jerusalem? Excavations here have revealed an Iron Age fortress with a casemate wall 5 meters thick, protected by 2 towers, and a sanctuary that dates back to the time of King David and Solomon. The Arad temple was composed of 3 main rooms, a main entrance, a main hall, and the inner sanctum. 3 steps led up to the elevated inner sanctum, in which stood a 1-meter-high stone stela, painted red. 2 stone altars flanked both sides of the entrance. At the center of the courtyard in front of the temple was an altar built of uncut stone. Now, this whole structure, though smaller and with different proportions, is very similar to the temple in Jerusalem, which also had a 3-room layout and a similar size altar in the courtyard. From this vantage point, you can more easily see the temple's layout. The open courtyard in the foreground contained the large altar that seems to have been built to specifications found in Exodus, hence the uncut stones. An opening in the wall leads to the holy place, and facing this is the Holy of Holies. Now, there are no ancient documents that describe the worship at this site, but the 2 stone altars provide perhaps the best clues. Some scholars suggest that they are evidence of that cycle of idolatry that had existed from the Judges period, where the worship of Canaanite gods, such as the Asheroth, was alongside the worship of Yahweh. This combining of religious worship is called syncretism. You don't want to drop your keys down that. One of the most exciting discoveries that took place on Arad occurred in the 1960s, when a number of Hebrew pottery shards with ancient writing were unearthed. A pottery fragment with an ancient inscription is called an ostracon, and is like an ancient letter that contains things like military correspondence, or even mundane things like tax receipts or even school exercises. The most famous of the ones discovered at Arad is called Ostracon 18, that refers to a religious shrine, saying, quote, "The house of Yahweh is well. It remains." Was this ancient letter referring to the temple here at Arad, or referring to the temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem? One thing is certainly clear from the Old Testament scriptures. The God of Israel had a zero-tolerance policy about his people mixing worship to him with worship to other gods. Deuteronomy 12 says, "When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations whom you go in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, 'How do these nations serve their gods, that I also may do the same?' You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods, for they have even burned their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods." Although some believe the Arad temple was also a temple to Yahweh, it was destroyed prior to these letters. And there is no evidence to suggest that it was a legitimate center of worship to Yahweh. It may have been an either unsanctioned temple to Yahweh or a pagan temple that had copied some of the forms of Solomon's temple. Either way, it was a violation of God's commands, and it demonstrated the religious syncretism that had troubled the Israelites.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So again, we don't know for sure who built it or why they built it or to whom they built it to. But the fact that we found Ostracon 18 and we also see the altar that's built exactly the way it's described in Exodus is pretty fascinating. Clearly they were relying on the Old Testament scriptures whenever they were building this thing. Whoever built it, but we don't know. So yeah, it's just, I think that's interesting, but it definitely gives us a picture of what the temple, the original temple that Solomon built in Jerusalem looked like, because that was completely destroyed. We just can't ever find that again because it's been completely destroyed. And built upon, and they built other temples, and there are multiple layers to the temple in Jerusalem. So, pretty cool that we have an intact temple that's an Israelite temple that's a replica of the one in Jerusalem, just scaled down. But definitely a lot of mystery, and I hope one day we uncover a little bit more and we know for sure who built it and why they built it. But pretty cool stuff. All right, well, thanks for tuning in for this biblical archaeology class, and we're going to put some songs up for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock.